Very cool. All right, well, folks, we're grateful to have you guys here. We're a couple minutes in. We got a good crew. As a reminder, first of all, my name's Andrew. This is Tyson. Most of y'all probably know Tyson, and hopefully are getting to know me. I've been on a handful of these now. And we're excited to unpack a couple of new features that OnTrajectory has released. Tyson and I, on the way in, we were talking a little bit and mentioned that in our rush of some releases, there's probably some there might be a bug or two. So you know what? If you've noticed one, just shoot us an email or something. We'd be
Questions at
happy to.
ontrajectory.com. Yes, shoot us.
So you can do that, or send it to us. That would be awesome, so that we can just figure that out. We think we've identified most of the little hitches in our get along, but but we're excited about where that's headed and some of the features that we've been able to release. So we'll talk through some of that today, plus take questions. As a reminder, it's our goal to take all the questions and figure out what those are and answer those while we're on the chat. And if you can put those in the Q&A, that helps me manage the Q&A, and then we can have the chat where, as folks just want to have some conversation, as we're talking, just like you guys are doing here, is fantastic. But the Q&A, there is a opportunity for you to just drop questions in there. So if you have one already you came with, you can drop it in there. Or as this conversation progresses and something pops into your mind, just drop it in there. And as Tyson walks through it, then eventually I'll start feeding him some of those questions. And like I said, we'll try to get to every question that comes through. So I think without further ado, Tyson, take us away.
I just turned on the sharing there. Thanks everyone for coming. We missed last month, so I feel like it's been forever since we did one of my more advanced webinars. So this webinar, I mean, if there's new folks on OnTrajectory, welcome. Hopefully anything I discuss, I will be able to couch in terms that are simple enough for new users, but we're also going to be talking about, any really complicated questions you might have. We might get into more advanced features, which is good. And so just thanks everyone for coming. And I hope I'm able to cover all of the pieces and parts correctly. I wanted to begin by talking about a new feature that just came out this week. So we had a release on, was it Wednesday or Thursday? I can't recall at this point. But not only did we release a new feature set, I should say feature set, because we're going to grow this. It's going to be really, really neat as it evolves. So we're laying the groundwork for something that's going to be that's going to continue to evolve. But we also changed up the UI. I know we keep tweaking the UI again and again, but that's because we're learning what makes OnTrajectory easier to use for folks. And sometimes having more things on the screen actually becomes a problem. But you don't want things to be 4 or 5 clicks away. You want things to be really close. So I'm going to quickly talk about some of the UI changes that occurred this week. You should have gotten from Andrew an email explaining this, but just in case you accidentally unsubscribed or it went to spam or you didn't see the email, I'm going to walk through that. So first off, we've created a little bit of visual space by couching the chart, the center bar, and the data entry side portion of the screen into boxes that are broken up, so everything's not bleeding together on the white background. So you've got this shadow effect. Just it helps the mind kind of create separation between elements on the screen. And then what we did is to relocate a few of the items that used to basically be 1 click away are now 2 clicks away, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. So there used to be a menu up here called Views, which is now located here, and it's more descriptive. It's called Toggle Chart Elements. So it tells you what you're going to be doing. So if you click Toggle Chart Elements, this used to be the view. Oh, it still is the Views menu, but it's under the item. But this is the old Views menu. So you can toggle if you're tracking your progress, which of course we want everyone to do. The beauty of OnTrajectory is it's not a point in time view of your future. It is a living, breathing model that your past is entirely recorded. So when the market goes up, when the market goes down, the market goes up, the market goes down, you see that history behind you. we call it progress or actual progress. And then from whatever point that you've made your last progress update, we create this gray line into the future. And it's gray because basically what we're doing is we're rebasing all of your growth assumptions, your income, your expenses, your contribution. We rebase all of that from this point that you last updated where you are. And as I said, markets go up and markets go down. So we don't want you necessarily to change your trajectory, your main assumptions, your central assumptions, every time there's a dip or a run up in the market. But if you see that you're consistently above or consistently below, then you go in and you can make some changes. So so that's what progress and projected progress is. Progress is the green area, what you've actually achieved. Projected progress is that gray dotted line, which is if your last progress update is reality, then that's where you go. Viewing in tomorrow's dollars, just a quick refresher, we do everything in today's dollars, meaning when you're looking at in this profile, they're ending up with 425,000. That's 425,000 in today's dollars. In tomorrow's dollars, it's a much bigger number because of the central inflation rate of 3% is compounded until age 90 in this case. So this is the buying power of that final number. So, but you can toggle that on the chart. Spending view, which is, I think, a really, really cool overlay. It makes the chart hard to look at, but it's really neat. So these are all your spending assumptions year over year. Like, so this year I spent 156,000. Probably I'm sending my kids to school or something. But this shows you a bar chart overlay of what your spending assumptions are year over year. This is a really important feature when you're doing something like if you're leveraging a 4% rule, because yeah, I can say that I'm going to spend 4%, but is 4% really enough to live on? And so if you're using the 4% rule and you want to see what are those real dollars that you're spending, that's a really important overlay to take a look at. Liquid assets, right? If you've got a lot of money tied up in your home or even potentially in rental properties, this is a way to split out liquid assets from illiquid assets. So, and you can see here, look at this. In this particular scenario, this person got really low to having not enough liquid because everything was tied up in property. Look at that big chunk that was tied up in property. And then, of course, they either downsized or they started to rent later in life, and that's why these lines come together. That's an important view. Anyway, I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole, but we relocated the views menu under these three dots. Other things that we relocated, metrics. Metrics are just a roll up of the current year, income, expenses. It's basically a snapshot of the output data, but just in a really easy to visualize way. And there's actually some additional metrics in here that you don't see in the output data. For example, the savings rate, or if you were going to use, let's say, 4% spending, what could you spend in this current year? So just some mathematical outputs that are interesting. So that's now there. It used to be under the strategies menu. We're trying to clean up the strategies menu because we're introducing new features. And every time we introduce a new feature, if it goes here, then this list gets just too long. So things that we have realized are not really strategies, let's just say, we've put here under the more button. So the chart elements, metrics, your progress history, export to PDF, they're now here under this new menu. So if you were looking for them, that's where they are. Which is also nice because it means that we don't have, stuff up here and stuff over there, and so it's just these two buttons basically house all the other features. But this is the new thing.
Yeah. So Tyson, real quick before you jump in there, I just want to throw one question Deborah threw out. If you have multiple scenarios, do any of the updates in your accounts in progress, do they get reflected in all scenarios or just the scenario that you're updating in?
Good question. If you created your scenarios, if what you've done is to create a basic scenario, and then you make copies of that scenario, and then make changes to those copies, then the answer is yes. Because what we do is we when you copy a scenario, all the accounts that you defined, when you copy it, it shares the progress history across all the accounts. So when you update your progress, assuming you've copied that scenario, then that progress update will be reflected in all of your scenarios. Now you might say, Tyson, that's fine, but what if I didn't do that? How do I remedy that situation? Easily enough. So let's say, for example, you didn't copy, or maybe you, let's use this because this is more realistic. Let's say you created a base scenario, you made a copy, but then you opened up a new account. So you added that new account into your baseline scenario. But of course, because you copied previously, you need to add it manually to your other scenario. They're not going to be connected, but you can connect them afterward. So let's just use that as an example. Let's say this was my baseline scenario. I added a new property, for example, a second home equity, but I need to go back to another scenario where that exists. All you have to do is, so let's add that second home equity. Okay, so there's that new home equity. What you can do is you go down here to progress history. So right now, this account does not share progress history because I just added it, right? So we don't know what it's akin to in another scenario. So you can click share progress history, choose the scenario you want to share from, scenario with mortgage, and then it's that second home equity account. So now both those scenarios will share that progress history together.
Every time I come into this tool, I'm always impressed. There's one more thing and I'm like, man, that's genius. Like he thought of everything. I love it, man. That's cool. Mm-hmm. So no worries. No worries, Deborah. I think that was just a quick update because we were talking through progress history and Tyson was updating where the views are. So I felt like it was a good one to just ping in there. As Tyson goes through the stress test and some of the new features, drop those questions in that Q&A as they come up. And so some of that stuff I can type out the answers there if I know them or bring them up to Tyson. So go ahead and drop them in that spot. But Tyson, back to a stress test.
Yeah. And just a reminder to everyone, this webinar, these advanced webinars, I'm only going to spend a few minutes introducing new features and functions. This is really about you guys. So bring the questions because that's the meat and bones of these particular webinars. This is not, and I should, Andrew runs a beginner webinar. So if there are folks in here, they're like, oh, I just want to learn how to use the tool. Andrew, when's the next one, Andrew?
You know what? I don't have it scheduled, but I'm gonna do. I've done a couple on weeknights, but I'm gonna pull up another Saturday here too because I think those work better for folks. So I'll throw a couple of dates out on the new website. I'm working on a calendar of all of that event, so it should be up by the end of next week.
And I think our goal. I hope I'm not speaking out of school here, but I think our goal is to do every 2 weeks. So there'll be a beginner, and then 2 weeks later an advanced, and 2 weeks later a beginner, and then 2 weeks an advanced is the way we're going to try to structure.
Yep. Yeah, and sometimes I've even done more beginners just because there's new folks who are jumping into the platform. So
right. Okay, awesome. All right, so let's get back to stress test. So if you'll recall, something else that changed this week, the inflation, the central inflation item on the central toolbar up until Wednesday or Thursday was a button, and you could click it and you could put a temporary inflation stressor. So you could say, and we actually coded this because of what's going on, in the world. It's not just in the US, but across the world, we've got an inflation spike. No one assumes it's going to last. Well, we all hope it doesn't last more than a year or two, but we wanted to be able to model an inflation spike. So we put that here. Then we realized, you know what? Now the markets are behaving very poorly, and there are other life stressors that occur. So we've taken the concept of having this temporary inflation stressor, which again used to be right here, and we've relocated it under stress test. And for now, we've added 2 more. I know bull market's really not it is a stress. It's a positive stress, but it is a stress. Right. We've added bear market, bull market, and inflation. So if you're looking for where did my temporary inflation spike feature go, it went here. And you can either toggle them on and off and just accept the defaults. I'll talk about what those defaults are, but you can also customize them as well. So yeah, let's quickly demo that. So if I want to do bear market, click it, bear market, you see adding event, and this is awesome. I hope people appreciate this because I love this. What we used to do with the temporary inflation stressor was we just took your trajectory and we just slammed it on there and showed you the effect. Well, that's fine to see the effect, but then your brain is like, well, wait a second, what was the old number? So then you had to turn it off to see the old number and, you know, to see the effects. We've actually, and this was a non-trivial effort to create a duplicate overlay on top of your trajectory. So actually what we're doing is we're rendering in memory, we're rendering two different trajectories and overlaying them. So now here's bear market. And so you see the line. So now you don't have to remember, oh, what was my old number? So your old number is still here, 425. And then you just hover over here and you can see the new number is 154. It's labeled in the tooltip. And so you can instantly see it and you don't have to remember what it was. I think that's awesome. Anyway, so, and same thing with inflation. I'm gonna toggle bear market off. I'm gonna turn inflation on. And now you see, so before we just slammed it on top, but now we show you both. So you can see if inflation was 8% for 2 years, I'm actually underwater, negative 37,000. Let me talk about some subtleties about these. Actually, let me turn on both of them and then talk about some subtleties about these numbers. So the bear market is preloaded at negative 20% for 1 year, beginning in the current year. You can change it to 2 years, you can change the performance, you can do whatever you want. The only difference between the bear market stressor and the bull market stressor is that whatever you type in bear market is automatically going to be negative. Whatever you type in on bull market is going to be positive. That's really the only difference. But the neat thing is, and I think this is fabulous. I turned on bear market, a 1 year 20% decline in the markets, and you can compare that to an 8% 2 year inflation spike. In the short term, the bear market hurts you more, or I should say in the short and middle term, but look at what the inflation spike does in the long term. The lines actually cross, but they don't cross for, what is this? From 48 to, for 25 years, it takes them to cross. Why, you might be wondering, why is that? Because in an inflation spike, what we do is we run up the cost of the expenses and then they sustain at that level. So from a percentage increase, it's magnified over time. That 1 year decline in the bull market, a bear market, kind of works itself out as growth rates recover, which is really, to me, that's a really fascinating thing. Now, another feature that we're going to be probably in a week or two, you can combine them together. So right now we're showing you them independently, but you could have like, so what we're going to do is we have bear market, we have inflation, and we're gonna have a little button down here, combine stressors. And if you combine them, then you'll see both of these smashed together in a super stressor event. And it'll be a third line on the chart. So that's coming very quickly. And I just say you can change the duration, you can change the start year. So if you want to plan for a future bull or a future bear, you can do that as well. I'm going to pause and canvas the community for any questions around this new feature. Oh, and after I canvas questions, I'm going to introduce some other visions.
So first question, are assumptions regarding average inflation and return rates meant to take into account temporary fluctuation? If we're now adding temporary fluctuation, shouldn't we maybe have a more optimistic estimate of the average?
That is,
does that make?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Here's what I'll say to that. In theory, what you're describing is contained in the Monte Carlo simulation. So in the Monte Carlo simulation, it basically includes stressors, right? It includes a situation where the next 2 years are really terrible markets or really horrible inflation. And then maybe awesome growth at the same. I mean, that's the nature of Monte Carlo. So I would not recommend, I mean, obviously you can do whatever you want to do. You can go in here and you can toggle your growth assumptions. A relatively new feature is that you don't have to go into every single age range and toggle. You can toggle all your growth by a half point up here with these major buttons. But yeah, you could do it, but I personally would probably not do it. I use, personally, the way I use these stressor events is in like an informational, like I just kind of, I like to see them in front of me and look at my endpoint and maybe build in a little bit of buffer in maybe my potential future spending or my how long I want to work to just make sure these landing points are within a particular comfort zone. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point that you could increase it because you're building it in. What I want to say though is that the nature of Monte Carlo, so let's just go strategies, analysis, Monte Carlo. The nature of Monte Carlo is that all of those events get smashed together, and then, you know, the worst cases are reflected in that bottom percentile. So right, you see here, well, this is this is getting hard to look at. Let me toggle off a few of these visuals here. All right, go back to analysis. All right, so the nature of Monte Carlo is that all of these stressors are basically built in, and the point of the manual stressors is to force them onto the growth assumptions. And now you can see exactly how, you know, this bottom 10%, the dark shaded area, that basically contains the stressors, is a way to look at it. So I hope that answers, in a long and convoluted way, I hope that answers that question.
No, I think that's helpful to figure out at least how, as we've conceptualized it, how we might say using the Monte Carlo and historical analysis versus just kind of stressors to see what kind of exact challenges we might have based on current market conditions.
Yep.
How about this?
Sorry, Andrew, do you want to introduce the other life events, or should I?
Well, we've already talked about the zombie apocalypse event that we're adding at Halloween time. No, just Deborah and I were joking in the chat. I think that's pretty funny. We are talking about, we've got market events and market stressors, and we're still working through stuff on like life events. So things, you know, Tyson's story of having, you know, oh my goodness, we're gonna have another kid. How does that? We've wrestled a little bit on language. Those are more like life events, you know. There certainly can be a stressor to your finance, children can, but events like that happen, that you have, and you're like, either you're planning for, or they come up in life. So we just want to be able to model some of those as specific events as well. So that's stuff that's coming down the line here soon as well.
Very relatively quickly. We've got, so far, I don't know, 15 different life events that we're contemplating. And they're really cool. It's like, you know, you don't have to go in and say, okay, you know, God forbid I'm out of work for a year, or 5 years down the line, or a kid, you know, whatever. We're going to have all these really neat ways to automatically add stressors without you having to, you know, add a daycare or add a whatever. I mean, obviously it's easy enough to click plus and add daycare, but you won't have to. And some of the other ones that we've been talking about are things like, well, what if I want to downsize my home at age 60? So we'll automatically sell your home, create a new home, and like all this stuff is going to be, it's magical. It's really neat. So all that's coming down the line.
Yeah, I mean, the couple of things that have just come through the chat. I mean, we've looked at, you know, how do you look at potential death of a spouse?
Yeah.
We've looked at, you know, even things like if you're going through a divorce, what was that look like? And so we've kind of started wrestling that down. I think a lot of those questions, that's why we just said, hey, let's get the market stuff out. Because one of the things, maybe just at large, we've seen a lot of folks start using this inflation stressor in the current market condition, and then recognizing there's market stuff, and then seeing, man, there's a lot of opportunity for people to just, I mean, we talk a lot about getting peace of mind, and even when that's hard or stressful stuff, you know, being able to kind of see how that's going to affect you is super valuable. And kind of to that, so Bob had a question. does the stress test analysis have any impact on other prior or future OT strategies? For instance, any like target goals or milestones you put out there, optimize spendings and withdrawals. Does it affect any of those or not?
That's seems like a simple question with a, I know I always overcomplicate answers, but your current withdrawal strategy, and he mentioned withdrawal strategy, and what was the other one?
Like optimize spending or goals.
Okay. Right. So your current, whatever you've chosen from a spending optimization or withdrawal optimization. Oh, I'm still in analysis mode here. Let's go back to stressors. Turn off Monte Carlo. Turn on some stress. All right. Whatever your current spending and your current withdrawal strategy is reflected in this line. And so the question is, how can I change my withdrawal strategy or change my spending in order to prevent this minus 37,000? The reason I'm talking so slowly is that I'm actually thinking about, this is a really cool new feature I think you've just come up with. So right now, when you're in comparison mode, so if I do compare scenarios, let me turn this off.
That might answer another question though, just in case, which is at the currently, you have to turn off your stressors before you can switch your scenarios because they don't run across all the scenarios.
Yeah. All right. So, okay, what I've just done is I've turned on scenario comparison. So I'm actually looking at second child and sample with mortgage and sample with mortgage second child. And the way this feature works is you can actually just click on second child scenario, and now it loads in memory. So all the stuff associated with second child is here. And if I want to go back to just one child, I can go back to it. And I think that question anticipates the ability to click on the stressor and create a new scenario out of it, which I'm going to just say does not exist today. But I think that's a great new feature. Is if I'm going to turn off compare. If I'm on a scenario and I turn on a stressor, how can I easily create a scenario out of this so that I can then change my withdrawal strategy, change my spending optimization so that I can plan for that stressor to be real. That feature does not exist, but I'm writing it down, or I don't know, Andrew, you write it down. Create independent scenario from stress event. I think that's a really great, you didn't ask for it, but your question anticipates it. So it doesn't exist today, but I think that's something we can do. Create a scenario from the stress event so that you can go in and optimize your spending and optimize your withdrawal strategy.
Well, and then I think that's so, but what I think it doesn't do maybe is if you have run an optimized spending number, that just kind of layers in to your account. So in the instance of optimizing spending, it has now, like say you ran an optimized spending, it said you need to decrease your spending by $200 a month or something like that. You decided, yes, I'll do that. And so it added that negative kind of expense. Right. Then your stressor is taking all of that into account.
Yes, it includes it, but I think the question is, how do I then fix it?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. I want to rerun. So I want to rerun optimized spending on the stressor scenario, on the stress scenario, which you can't really do right now. I mean, I'm sorry, you can do it, but it's going to run on the main scenario, not on the stress scenario.
Yeah, that's cool. So both sides of that coin. Hopefully we've answered it clearly.
Yeah.
Got a couple other questions here. It's good. Folks are definitely looking at this going, hey, this is pretty neat. So question about just underlying investments and indexes, like when we're calculating bull and bear market impacts, like which, what are we kind of tracking at least on some of those?
Yeah. So it's I would say it's a broad stroke. It's not you're not picking, you know, real estate to be up and equities to be down and bonds to be stable. Like it's not done that way. It's really just a broad assumption. General market performance in your account down 20%. So yeah.
But in that case, like, maybe this is part of this I'll say is my question, given that is, like, in general, people are using the Dow or the S&P or whatever as kind of like the average percent, you know, change. And so you're saying in OT's case, you're putting in some growth percentages that are your own assumptions, like as an individual, on what the market will do. And then from those assumptions, it's dropping 20%.
Exactly. That's perfectly summarized. So there's a growth, a complicated word for a single number. This is called a compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, C-A-G-R, which has a different meaning than CAGRs when I was in college, but
different letters too.
Right. So this is a CAGR, and basically we're burdening or affecting this CAGR with this number. So we're going, instead of getting 6% this year, it's minus 20%. And that's, again, it's a very broad stroke way to do it. That's currently the way we're doing it.
That makes sense, and it gives you as the individual investor who's using the tool, you know, ability to, you know, either track an index that you choose to track or kind of run something on your own. Right. Makes sense.
Yep. Now I will on that conversation quickly, just as a reminder or as notification when running, because again, these stress tests are going against that assumed average growth rate, which is different than Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo has got its own set of assumptions, and in Monte Carlo there is a portfolio mix, and the default, actually I forget what the default is, but you can go in here and change it. So you have a stocks, bonds, and cash, and the ability to put if you've got, like, for example, assets under management, you can put a management fee in there, and you can change your portfolio mix, and that's going to affect those Monte Carlo analyses, which we demoed earlier, and I'm now demoing again.
Very nice. So in light of that, so quick question from Tyler is, like, say in the bear market performance, is it per year, in the sense that if you modeled 2 years, is it 20% each year, or is it a percentage over a certain amount of years?
Each year.
Cool. Yeah. Sweet. Each year.
Yeah.
All right. So kind of continuing to go down the line here, adding stress events for each category, such as a bear, inflation, or bull, in the future, you eventually able to add later events, or better off relying on the Monte Carlo for more complex scenarios.
I'm sorry, can you reread that?
So can we add only one stress event for each category, such as bear, inflation, or bull?
So
and
yeah,
currently I would say yes, you can do one bear market at a time currently. Although we've talked about,
so there's gonna be 3 categories. There's gonna be market stressors, inflation stressors. Well, okay, so those are 2 categories, and then there's a third category called income.
Life events.
Income. Now, income can either affect income or expenses. So it's a monetary, I don't even know what word to use for it, but that third category, you can have multiple. So you could be out of work and have a second child, right? So in that category, because one's affecting income, one's affecting expenses, they can be together, but you can't have multiple inflations or multiple market stressors. But so now, okay, you know what? I'm thinking through his question or her question a little bit better, because maybe you want to do a bear market now and a bull market in 5 years. You know what? We should probably, right now you can't do it, but we should probably think about that.
Well, you can't run them stacked.
Right.
But you can run the
same year. They would have to be in separate years.
Well, you can run, but you can run like a bear market to like today and a bull market starting 4 years from now, but it's hard.
You can
We
do-
don't have them stacked yet.
Can you do that? Oh, because right now they're all separate lines.
Right.
Right.
So if you
Yeah.
turned on a bear
Yeah.
market and a bull market, you can
Right.
hit them at different times. They just don't stack off on top of one another.
So, right.
So like if you start that on 2030,
Are you
for
sure this
instance.
works? I hate clicking things. I don't know what's going to happen, but. Yeah, so it doesn't. Oh, it turned this one off.
Yeah.
So right now they don't. No.
I don't think you had it on. Turn it on.
Oh.
Bold. We're going bold here on.
Okay.
Yeah, see?
All right. I'm wrong.
See?
All right. Okay. There we go.
So, but what you can't do is stack them on top of each other. Like, oh, that bear market hits 3 years later.
I honestly didn't know
on
that it worked this way. I'm embarrassed, but that's cool. It's cool. Yeah. When you combine them, okay. All right. I hope that answers that question. But it doesn't completely answer because I'm anticipating what he wants to know is like, what if I had a bear here and then I'm gonna put that bull on top of that bear, which right now you can't do, but we need to think about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's we were having some math questions.
Yeah,
I think when we were talking about
it gets a little bit complicated, to be sure.
Just a bit. Very cool. So Stephanie was checking in, and I'll this one on some of the old reports that you can generate for and from these. I mean, I know we run. Is there anything that comes out that you can run on, whether it's PDF or output data, relative to some of these specific topics?
Are we talking about output data, the PDF out? So let me show what we have, just to remind everyone, and then we'll revisit that question. Because I think the question is before and after. That's what she means by alpha beta, before and after. And honestly, we don't have that from a report perspective. So view output data. This is the grand total is a roll up of every year, the major things that happen. So your income, your taxes, RMDs, your expenses, your cash flow, everything that happens in the year rolled up in a single chart all the way to the end. The income tab is obviously just the income streams. Expenses are the expense streams. Accounts are all your individual accounts and the balances on every account year over year. And the really neat thing is you can drill down into each account. So if I go into my 401k, I can see all the transactions year over year on that account. And I can do that obviously for any account. And then withdrawals this is where are we pulling from? Where are we pulling funds from? And what is the reason that we're pulling it? And obviously the amount. So I guess the question was, can I get this kind of view on the before and after? Right now, no. But that earlier question about creating a scenario out of a stress event, once we do that, then yes, because the way our compare feature works, go back to second child. The way our compare feature works is you can, once you're comparing scenarios, you can just, as I said, you can just click on it. And when you click on it, it loads in memory. So when you hit output data, now you've got the output data for that. You can copy this, you can put it in a spreadsheet, you can print it. So if you wanted to be able to do, create two spreadsheets and look at the data, then you can. So not yet, but soon.
Cool. No, that's helpful.
Make sure I answered that question correctly, because I'm not 100% sure I did.
Yeah, Stephanie, if you want to, if that's accurate, if that was an adequate answer, let us know. We're working too. So cool. Noticed. Yeah, thanks, Bob. I'll type a quick answer. Okay, here's a little bit of a slightly more complex. So using the inflation optimum, let's say there's 9% inflation for the year 2022. So you model that. Then 2 years pass, we're back to normal. But in 2030, it happens again. Is the model that you did in 22 locked into your on trajectory end age? So this kind of, I think, goes back to your scenario idea that you were talking about earlier, is the model that you did in 2022 locked into the OnTrajectory end age so that when 2030 hits, we see the impact for both? Or once you put things back to normal in 2024, the 2022 inflations are cleared for the future until the next inflation spike, where it would start temporarily again?
Yep. All right. So again, I'm going to have to go back to the way it is right now versus the way that this feature is likely to evolve. So the short answer is yes. Once you put a spike in, so let's go to the inflation. So I think he said 9% or whatever. It doesn't matter. So I do 9% for 1 year, 9% for 1 year, and I save that. Oh, let me turn it on. Next year, when when I'm past it, it returns, and yes, it will stay. Once we have this as an independent scenario and not as an overlay, which you see it now, yes, it will stay. So I want to say yes, but the features is not complete yet. So in its full implementation, once we have the ability to put multiple stressors, yes, it will, that one will contain the old one and then overlay the new one. Right now, it will retain the old one, but you can't put multiple stressors on the single line. So that's why I can't say, yes yet.
Now, here's what the flip side of that would be, though, as I understand it, if that is actually the case and you are tracking your progress over the next 2 years, you would be able to either adjust your trajectory, like Tyson said at the beginning, to change some of the growth assumptions, or you would actually just at that point you would have been recording your progress, and then you could run it, based on that current progress history.
Yeah.
A new inflation event at that point. So you wouldn't have baked it necessarily into the plan, but you would see it in your project or your actual progress history.
Yeah, Andrew, I'm so happy. Yeah, that you just shifted my whole mindset. I think that's a really important thing to remind everyone of, is that part of making these long-term models and retaining all of this history, part of the benefit of that is that I can update the model. It's a living and breathing model. It's not like I set it once and then I can never touch it. So in past webinars, we've talked about the ability to create expense patterns or growth assumptions that are the past, and then to split that out into current and future. And as time goes by, update them. So for example, the way that I use OnTrajectory from an expense perspective, I have a single line item, which is from when I started tracking my expenses and then my current age. And then I have one for the next year, and then what I'm targeting my expenses to be, and then I have my retirement expenses. So roughly speaking, it's set up like this. And so in this case, this person's their expenses from when they started to their current age was $6,000. They're trying to cut back on their monthly expenses. They're aiming for 45, which will begin next year until retirement, and then they're having a more rich retirement. So what I do, and why what Andrew said is so important, is when things shake out, when we find out what inflation really was, or what your expenses really are, or what really happened in the markets, go back, change this number, toggle your end age one more year. So let's say it's 2023. I'm now 44 years old. I wish I was 44. And now I'm 44. So I just click one little click. I'm now 44, and I bake in what those actual expenses were, and then my assumptions about the future. Or conversely, in my investment accounts, we add an age range here. So I have from 38, 43, and then from 44 to 62. So maybe because of market conditions, my average went down to 5.5% or whatever. And then the next year, I simply bumped this up to 44. The future now goes to 45. And then because I know what reality was, I put that number in here so that my model fixes itself. So in a way that gets us out of the complication of these multiple stress events combining and multiple ones and retaining them in memory. It kind of gets us out of the weeds on that, because I know what really happened, and I don't have to put these possibilities into the model. So thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think that's there's a lot of features that we're putting in here that you go, oh yeah, how do they connect with one another? So it's helpful to just, even honestly for us, it's helpful.
Well, that's why these webinars are so valuable.
That's what I was going to say.
It's learning for us, and it's learning for the community as well.
Yep, definitely.
We got about 10 minutes left. I just want to remind.
Perfect. So let's jump in here. So Stephanie followed up, exports/reports. Can you export things to Excel or no?
Yes.
Yes. Cool. And let's see. Yeah, I know. I just want to close the loop on that one. And man, her point is, she said, I ask it specifically because we often have a partner or spouse who couldn't care nearly as much about this as the rest of us. And we see that happens a lot. And one of the things that we would hope that OnTrajectory allows you to do is have kind of a good amount of conversation so that everybody's on the same page, because that matters a lot to just your personal well-being when you and your spouse or partner are on the same page. So for sure.
I'm going to say unequivocally, and I'm very proud of this, OnTrajectory has saved marriages. So
I would believe that.
Throw that out there.
Okay, so going back to an account updates applying across copied scenarios. So this will apply to copied scenarios created before the feature was released. He said, because
which feature?
I would assume this most recent feature.
Right. You have to toggle that on in whatever scenario you want it to be toggled on. That's true.
Yeah. So in other words, if you have a stressor toggled on in one scenario, it's not going to carry over into another scenario. But what does carry through is any copied scenario. All that information will carry over if you copy from one scenario to the next, but not your stressors.
Progress information.
Yes.
Progress.
Okay.
Recording of progress over time will carry over.
All right. So here's a question. Using this scenario that you're showing here, imagine taking, this is from Brian, a pension value in a lump sum in January of 2023. You place the money into a traditional IRA. Can you demonstrate or model setting up the IRA with the appropriate start and ages?
Right. So, and this is actually an important point of subtlety about creating accounts that are not started in the first year. So obviously, when you come in to did you finish reading that question? I didn't cut you off, did I, Andrew?
No. Yeah. He said, I just tried it. Shows calculated balance versus a not started, just trying to get the confusion out. So that's perfect.
All right, good. So when you start OnTrajectory, obviously you define your accounts and you put a starting balance in. That starting balance is just what you have. But when you start accounts in the future, there's always a question of, is this money coming from someplace else? Or in the case of a pension, a lump sum pension, it's probably not reflected in your model anywhere else. So it's kind of like, I don't want to say free money, but it's money that's coming in without being funded from any place. And if it's in the future, it's going to show in the calculated balance column as not started. It shows as not started because if we're in 2022, the accounts beginning in 2023, there's no balance. Because it doesn't exist yet. So that's why it shows as not started. But what I wanted to add to that, so let's go ahead and just do, let's say that pension money is going into an IRA. Well, no, let's say it's going into a brokerage account. So we got a brokerage account that's going to begin at age 55. Lump sum pension's going to fund it, right? It shows it's not started because it hasn't started yet. So even if I'm anticipating that it's going to be $100,000, it's going to continue to show not started until I hit age 55. But what I wanted to say is this $100,000 is going to appear out of nowhere. It's not going to be funded by anything. It's just going to be added to your model. That's useful for something like a pension, which which Brian asked about, but it's not useful if you're downsizing a home and buying a new property, right? Because when you create a new property in OnTrajectory, we call it home equity. We list it as an account or asset, but that money's coming from someplace. Right? It's not poof, just coming from nowhere. It's coming from the property that I sold. So what you can do when you're creating, and this is only when you're creating an account or asset that has a future beginning date, a beginning age, you can choose fund starting balance with income or assets. If you toggle that on, it's going to act just like an expense, or it's going to draw the money from, wherever it would normally draw the money from. So if you're selling the property, here's what I'll say. If you're selling the property, sell it at one age and then put the purchasing the next property, not in the same year, but in the next year. I know in reality, it might actually happen in the same year, but for the calculation engine to work properly, it's better to put them 1 year apart, because then the funds will just flow smoothly into the new property. I know you didn't ask that question, but it occurred to me that it's an important concept.
No, that's helpful. And I mean, it's actually I will dovetail a little bit right now. I think this is we're kind of timing this perfectly. Last question, and that's the last open one on the docket. If we change expenses to reflect reality, do we have to go back and alter our assumed expenses that had multi-year horizons? For example, say you were doing a 200K addition to your house over 3 years. If the expense did not spread exactly flat over the 3 years, the delta would be reflected in account updates, correct? If I changed my expense profile to reflect reality at the beginning of next year, would I also have to change that large expense profile to match reality? Made you think about it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, in one way, I would say if it's in that example, a really large expense like that, it is probably useful to go back and sometimes, it's like splitting hairs. Like, is it really going to affect the overall model or not? And the only reason I'm hesitating is because if it's a really large expense, all expenses, all incomes, and all contributions are pegged to the central inflation rate. So if in reality I underspent in a particular year, or I overspent in a particular year, inflation is going to affect that spending differently depending on what year I have it in. Whether that actually has a big effect on the model 30, 40, 50 years into the future, I don't know. I would literally have to play around with some scenarios. Off the top of my head, I would say you probably don't need to do it, but it might be a fun exercise just to check it. I'm sorry, I don't have a firm opinion or definitive answer on that question.
Well, it probably has something to do with, different people maybe use it differently on how they manage big process expenses. Like I've asked that question. My joyful, we had a leak in our bathroom after we just came back from Disney, so we had to model some unexpected expenses to revamp our bathroom. And so some of that to me is like, oh, how do I update I update my account balances, and so sometimes my account balances reflect my expenditures, my large scale expenditures,
which I think
versus
was the question.
Changing my recurring expenses.
Right.
And so in some ways, that's how I've had to, at least personally, kind of wrap my brain around it, which is I don't necessarily think about it in my expense, even though some of it is cash flowed from an income standpoint. Like, oh well, we just
and the thing is, if he didn't update the expense and the balance of the account it's going to look like it's not growing the way that it should have been growing. So you might be tempted to adjust your growth assumptions. But in reality, the reason it wasn't growing was because he tapped it because he had a bigger expense. So it really was growing the way it was supposed to be growing, but because of the expense, it burdened it. So again, I would say it might be useful to go back and update those expenses. I'm just not sure in the 40-year future whether it's going to bear out a big difference.
Well, and
I
to
mean, I
that
don't know
point,
the
I think,
yeah.
and I think that's where, just kind of last little teaser, and I think we'll wrap up here. But one of the things that we're going to be talking about a lot next coming up is too around some things like a goal. For instance, if your goal was a house addition, how are you going to fund that and expense that? How do you put it inside of there? So hopefully, you know, we'll be able to answer. So that's a great example of a question that we would actually probably sit around and debate, just like we have here, on how we would actually show and model. So appreciate everybody joining us. Thank you guys. Jay, thanks. Appreciate all the questions. I'm grateful. Thanks that you've been here since the early days. That's awesome. It's really encouraging. If you know what, since you're here, I'm just going to copy and paste that last comment and just go, man, if you're open to it, we always are looking for folks who would share OnTrajectory, throw it out wherever, email your friend, let somebody know that this is a valuable tool. You know, if we can use your, as a review, we can put it anonymous, but throw it out there sometimes, because we're always looking for that. We think it's a valuable tool. We think it helps. Grateful for you guys showing up for these and the encouragement, and also the feedback. It's always helpful when you guys are using the tool and challenge us to figure out the next piece of the puzzle. So we're super grateful. Thank you guys all for being here. And we will be here next week. Next week, I lied. Next month.
I lied.
Next month. I didn't mean to. It was a misspoke, I should say.
Yeah, and everyone, yeah, I just want to echo. Thanks everyone for being interested, for taking an interest in your own financial lives. You know, we're trying to make it as easy as possible. So keep the suggestions coming, and thank you.